Okay. Good evening, students. Today we are going to have a session on nationalism in India. Now, what does the word nationalism mean? Nationalism means a feeling of belonging to a nation. It's a feeling of being united as a nation. So, what happened was that uh, we had the British colonial rule in India. So that is referred to as colonialism. So it was a very repressive regime. Means the Indians were exploited by the British for their own benefits. There was a mass discontent among the people. What was needed was some unifying agent or some unifying authority who would go and lead the people. So we all start this movement, gathered momentum towards the end of the First World War. So we had Gandhiji who initiated the movement of nationalism. Now, how? Gandhiji had a background to him. That is, in South Africa, he had done a mass movement against discrimination policy, and his idea was that of satyagraha. Now, what is satyagraha? Satyagraha is a peaceful and a non-violent way of making your oppressor realize that he is at fault, and it is working on his heart rather than using forceful and aggressive means. You work on the heart of the aggressor. So Gandhiji decided to get this Satyagraha movement going, and he started first with the indigo plantations in Champaran district, and then he worked for the peasants in Kheda district in Gujarat. So basically, this is considered to be the starting of the uh, nationalism movement in India, where there was one authority under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi, the whole country united in different ways. Okay? So, in Kheda district, Gandhiji told the peasant is just means a very poor farmer is called as a peasant. He told them not to pay the land revenue. Basically, do not obey the government. That was all what Satyagraha movement was all about. So then in 1918, in 1916, in Champaran in Bihar, for the indigo farmers, then again in Kheda, because of shortage of food, there was a crop failure. So Gandhiji told the peasants not to pay revenue. And then in 1918, in Ahmedabad, he helped the cotton workers. So this was the beginning of nationalism. You know what?
Your voice is not coming.
Sir, not able to hear your voice.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. Sir, your voice is not coming.
Can you hear me, students?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
They can hear? Okay. So we'll continue. Now, this nationalist movement took momentum, or rather started during the end of the First World War. Because of the First World War, there was a lot of problems in the people in terms of rising of prices. And the other thing was that the British would forcibly ask a lot of people from the countryside to act as their soldiers in the war. So there was already a lot of anti-British sentiment going on. And what was needed was a unifying force which would start along this nationalism movement and a few agitations. And Gandhiji showed us the way. Gandhiji how? So, because of the World War One, there was increased taxes and increase in the price of food grains and forced recruitment. So Gandhiji in 1916, he united the workers of Champaran with the indigo plantations. And in 1916, in Kheda, in Gujarat, there was shortage of food due to crop failure. And Gandhiji asked the villagers not to pay any revenue. And in 1918, in Ahmedabad, the cotton workers were also taught how to protest in a non-violent manner. So Satyagraha basically is a non-violent way of asserting one's opinion. In this, the whole point is that you have to convert the other person to your way of thinking without any use of force. Now, the British rule was always very brutal and repressive. So now when movement is gaining momentum, this Swadeshi movement, this feeling of nationalism, so they introduced the Rowlatt Act. So what was the Rowlatt Act? In the Rowlatt Act, the British government was empowered to arrest any freedom fighter and put him in detention, put him in jail for 2 years without any trial. So basically, any voice that goes against the British, that was crushed. So now, so Gandhiji decided, let us have developed measures against this, and he started Satyagraha Day on 6th April 1919 was observed as Satyagraha Day. Now, in this period, a very drastic action took place, which sort of was unmatched in its brutality. In Amritsar, there was a place called Jallianwala Bagh, and it was the Baisakhi festival. So, both as a celebration of Baisakhi festival and in a protest against the British, lots of people had come to this area. Now, this was a ground sort of an area, and a harsh British military personnel, General Dyer, what he did was that he cut off all the exit points, and then he started firing without any warning. So this was something which was unmatched in its brutality. This is the level of ruthlessness, of inhumanity that the British showed, and it stirred the minds and hearts of the people, and they, in protest against this, they started becoming violent. So the Britishers became even more inhuman. Like what was the rule? Like people had to
crawl whenever they passed through any Britishers. They had to give salam to the Britishers. They had to rub their noses in the ground. You know, to rub your noses in the ground is actually a proverb. And imagine doing that literally. That is how bad in heart the British government was. So we needed something to uh, against the British, and but because of this great oppression by the British, the people would react in a violent manner. So Gandhiji's idea was that there should be no violence from the side of the Indian people, come what may from the British side. This was not followed by the people generally. And so he called off the movement in Satyagraha, and Rabindranath Tagore renounced his knighthood. What is knighthood? Knight. When you are given the title of Sir by the British government. So Rabindranath Tagore said nothing doing. This is brutal Jallianwala Bagh massacre, and he renounced his knighthood. Then the Indians got one more chance at the end of the World War I. The Ottoman of Turkey. Now the Khalifa of Turkey was considered to be the head of the Muslim people throughout the world. And at the end of World War I, there were harsh peace treaty which was to be imposed on the Ottoman of Turkey. And so what Gandhiji decided was that we can start a Khilafat movement. So he started a Khilafat movement. What was his idea was that in Khilafat movement, you would have the involvement of Muslims also, because their religious head was involved in this. So he started the Khilafat movement. But again, the Khilafat, and there were certain points of this non-cooperation movement. So see, we start with non-cooperation, then move on to civil disobedience. So non-cooperation is that you boycott all British goods, basically. And then what it did was that the import of goods from foreign to India, it was halved. The amount got half, reduced by 50%. And people started wearing Indian clothes. And second thing was that the middle class in many towns and cities, what they did was that they started boycotting banks, courts, schools, colleges. But the problem with this was that it was a short-sighted measure. Why? Because we didn't have any alternate organizations to replace the organizations of the British. That's why this movement also petered off after some time. Means it reduced in intensity after some time when people realized that there was no alternate means. And you know, one thing, khadi was even more expensive than the clothes which came from England. So to sustain this movement, it became a very difficult proposition. Then we will see the effects of movements in different parts of India. First of all, in the countryside. Now, in a place called Awadh in North India, Jawaharlal Nehru, along with one Baba Ramchandra, he developed a movement, and it was called as the Out Kisan Sabha. Now, what happened was that in the countryside, the peasants were oppressed by the landlords and the talukdars. They were given very low wages, and they had to do beggar also. Now, what is beggar? Beggar is a term which means that you do work and you won't get any money for that. So they had to do. They were oppressed by the landlords. So a movement was initiated, but again, this movement turned violent. So basically, people were not ready to be totally non-violent. They didn't find it a natural way of self-expression. Then the tribal peasants done in wooden hills. We had a very revolutionary character called as Raju. And what he did was that he said that he's a follower of Gandhi and he had a mass following. But although he said not to have alcohol, his problem was that his means were forceful and violent. So The British caught him, and in 1924 he was executed, and the movement ended. So basically, the whole point was that non-violence was not followed strictly by the people who were doing this movement. Then there was a very brutal act enacted in 1859, the Inland Emigration Act. Now, plantation workers in Assam were not even allowed to leave that area in which they were working without permission. It was like a jail. So what they did was that they thought, okay, let us protest against this. So they left and they were going home, but they were caught on the way by the British authorities, and they were brutally beaten up. So this is how this non-cooperation movement was, let's say, it began, but it did not gather as much momentum because the British were very brutal, and secondly, the Indians did not always follow the policy of non-violence. So Gandhiji thought that the people were not ready as yet to follow the non-cooperation movement. Now, a few years passed, and after that, Gandhiji thought that we will start another movement. Well, what was the reason for that? Was that during the late 20s, there was a lot of economic depression in the world, and in the period from 1926 to 1930, agricultural prices started falling and they almost collapsed. So the whole economy, which was agriculture based in India, it grinded to a halt. It came to an end. Then what the Britishers did was that now let us think about what to do. So they enacted a commission called as the Simon Commission. What would the Simon Commission do? It would think about the representatives, how to represent India in the councils. But there was not even a single Indian member in the Simon Commission. So wherever Simon Commission came to India, it was greeted with cries of Simon, go back, Simon, go back. It was totally opposed by the Indian populace. Then the Congress as well as the Muslim League unitedly fought against the Simon Commission. And then in October 1929, the Viceroy of India, Lord Irwin, gave a vague idea of giving dominion status to India. Now, he didn't specify what he meant by the dominion status and what it would include. So, even the Congress, it was the Indian representative against the British. Basically, it represented the Indian population who were against the British. Even the Congress was divided into two parts. One was the conservative and the other was the radical. Now, the conservatives thought that let us approach the government in a soft, civilized manner. And the radicals thought nothing doing. We will use force and we will take radical measures. Radical means something revolutionary, something out of the normal. So conservative means the conservative approach and the radicals means a revolutionary approach. So the radicals won over. Once the conservatives' approach didn't work, the government would simply ignore that. So then Gandhiji thought of one idea, why not have something which will include all the people. Now students, all of us need salt in our food. Salt is the most common ingredient of all food items eaten by everybody, rich or the poor. And the government had put a tax on salt, as well as that the government held a monopoly on the salt production, that only the government could produce salt. So Gandhiji decided to have a salt march. So he went from his ashram in Sabarmati to Dandi, a distance of around 240 miles. He started off with 78 followers, and they covered 10 miles per day. And on the way, they would stop and they would explain to the people what this movement is all about. And they went to Dandi, and symbolically they broke the salt by when you boil water, you get salt. So Gandhiji boiled some water in the Dandi beach, and this is how he broke the salt law. Now, what happened was that government decided to get too aggressive. So women and children were not spared at the beatings. About 1 lakh people at that time, 1 lakh was a big thing. 1 lakh people were imprisoned, taken to prison. So, and there were several violent incidents. Whenever violence happened, Gandhiji was not happy because he was basically a very non-violent person. So, because of this violence, he decided to call up the movement. So we see again and again repeatedly because of certain violent happenings. In 1922, it was the Chauri Chaura incident, and in which some few policemen were killed. Here again, against in a retaliation to the police force, people would react in a violent manner. Gandhiji would not like it, and the movement would be stopped. So, then Gandhiji thought of indulging in discussions with the government. Let us discuss things rather than having agitation. So he went to a roundtable conference, but the roundtable conference was also not a success. He was not able to get from the British government what he wanted. Then, see, civil disobedience movement meant different things to different people. Okay? Now, we go to the countryside. The rich peasant communities, the landlord of the landlord category rather than the poor laborer, they found that because of increasing taxation, the civil disobedience movement opposed increased taxation. So they were enthusiastic supporters of the civil disobedience movement. And for the poor farmers, the thing was that they had to pay a lot of rent on their land. So they also did not like this. Their thing was different than that of the rich laborers. For rich laborers, it was taxation that was the issue. For poor laborers, it was the rent that was the issue. Then, now, even during those days, India had businessmen. See, when we think of the freedom struggle, the only thing that comes to mind is a lot of freedom fighters. But other things were also taking place in India. There were Indian industrialists also. So this Indian industrialists had profited a lot from the First World War. But again, the policies of the British were not too conducive towards Indian businessmen. So even they found that their voice, their point of view would also be appreciated by the civil disobedience movement. Industrial working classes, they did not take part too much in the civil disobedience movement. Then, one more important thing that came to the forefront during this civil disobedience movement was the participation of women. Women, for the first time, rich ladies from the city side and high caste ladies, women coming from the high castes, they took part in this civil disobedience movement. So basically, most of the country was united except one category, and that was the untouchables. Now, there was a category of people who were the untouchables. The thing was that if they touch somebody by mistake, or if somebody touched them by mistake, then that other person would have to take a bath and things like that. So this is one of the worst aspects of Indian social life at that time. So they called themselves Dalits, and Gandhiji renamed them as Harijan, means Hari ka Jan, sons of God. So they were their leader was Babasaheb Ambedkar. What Babasaheb Ambedkar proposed was something. He have a separate representation of the untouchables, And you will have separate electorate also. Now, what is electorate? Electorate is people who vote in the elections or are eligible to vote in the elections. So he wanted a separate category altogether. They will have separate representation, and the people who vote for them will also be Dalits themselves. Now, that was not acceptable to the Indian Congress. What the Indian Congress said was that we will have certain representation of them in the scheduled caste category, but the people who vote for them, they will come from the general electorate. They won't be from the specific Harijan electorate. Then the Khilafat movement was not as much of a success as one would have wanted. So the Muslims, they were distrustful of the Congress. What they thought was that the Congress did not serve their purpose. That was the thinking of the Muslims. And Muhammad Ali Jinnah, he was the main leader of the Muslims, and they had their Muslim League. So he also asked for separate electorate, but what he said was that he was willing to give up this demand if Muslims were assured reserved seats. So if you block certain seats for the Muslim in the Central Assembly, and representation would be in proportion to the population, means let's say a certain percentage of the population would be represented in the council. If there are more Muslim people in a particular area, correspondingly, we should have more Muslim population in the assembly and the councils. So this was the condition put forward by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Now, so different people from different categories of India, of Indian population, were involved in this struggle. Now, what gave this gave a feeling of collective oneness, like we Indians are a united lot. See, when somebody oppresses a group of people, those group of people, however the differences will be, they come together. No, Gandhiji's thinking was that it was the cooperation of the Indian people in the mid-19th century which had led to the British rule. So the opposite, we'll have a non-cooperative movement which will be a fight against the British rule. It was the genesis, it was the basis of the Gandhiji's thinking of non-cooperation movement. With cooperation, the British rule got established in India. With non-cooperation policy, it will be taken back. Means the British will be fought by the non-cooperation movement. And he had the principles of ahimsa in mind. Now you see all these various agitations against the repressive and brutal government policies failed because at some level people reacted in violence, and a lot of British officials or British authorities or people belonging to the ruling category were killed. So everywhere, every time this happened, Gandhiji would call off a movement. And when Babasaheb Ambedkar thought of this idea of separate electorates for the scheduled caste, then Gandhiji went on a hunger strike. And this movement was what Gandhiji thought was that do not alienate, do not sort of differentiate totally the Dalits, whom he called the Harijans. Let them join the mainstream community instead of keeping that as a separate part. That separate part will create a sort of division. So, even among the Congress, there was a split. There were conservative people like Motilal Nehru who thought that one must approach the government in a civilized manner. You must asked for them. You must like talk with them, have a talk with them rather than having movements. Whereas uh, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Subhash Chandra Bose, Jawaharlal Nehru, these were all in the category of the radicals. They thought that we'll have to apply some pressure on the government. Otherwise, it will go on its oppressive rule. See, government, the British government benefited no category of Indian people. So that became a sort of unifying force for the Indians that we are led by a foreign country government, and that government is exploiting us for its own benefit. So they needed someone to show the way, and the biggest leader of that time was Mahatma Gandhi. So by starting off various movements like Champaran in Kheda and Ahmedabad cotton workers, he laid the groundwork for the non-cooperation movement. Then what happened is that because of this united struggle, people of all religions from different areas, they were united in the struggle against the English. So they developed a sort of nationalistic feeling in India as a nation. Now, India as a nation is also represented in art form. So, Bharat Mata. So, a pictorial image of Bharat Mata was created by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay in 1870. And he also wrote Vande Mataram, which was a song dedicated to our motherland. Then Bharat Mata, the image of Bharat Mata, this Bankim Chandra created an idea, and the image was painted by Abanindranath Tagore. Abanindranath Tagore. The struggle is one thing, and the Indian culture and heritage is a different thing. So the struggle united the Indian people in their fight against the British, but as did the collective culture. Like India has a huge history, and the history is passed in the form of folklore. Folklores. For this folklore is a way of expressing your feelings through songs and dances and passing of the stories orally from generation to generation. So we had one Natasha Sastry, who had a massive collection of folk tales and songs, which led the movement for folk revival. FOLK, folk basically means the original people of the country, what is represented by them. We have a word folk. So folklore, Lore, folklore, folk story. So it's a folklore means this story is accepted here as the truth. And our folk stories involves Ramayana, Mahabharata, among other things. Then we also got one more thing, a representation of India through a flag. So we had a tricolor. The flag was on three colors, red, green, and yellow. It was first designed in Bengal. And it had 8 lotuses representing the 8 provinces and a crescent moon representing Hindus and Muslims. Then Gandhiji designed the Swaraj flag. It was tricolor. It had a spinning wheel. It had the photo of a spinning wheel in between, which represented the charkha. And what was the charkha? Charkha was a symbol of self-help, means you weave your own clothes yourself. Then what happened was that somehow in this self-assertiveness, it was made to seem as if only the Hindu religion and culture was in the forefront, that the Congress was more of a party which represents only the Hindus. And so the other people from other communities, they felt left out. They felt that they were not being represented enough. So there was a unifying effect because of Satyagraha and non-cooperation movement. But at the same time, there was a feeling among communities other than Hindus of being left out, of being not being involved in the freedom struggle. Like we had images mostly of only of Hindu gods and goddesses. So other community, especially the Muslims, thought that they were being left out. So this was one problem in India, the division among the lines of community. Then the expectations of different groups. See, India is a very diverse, is a land of diversity. We have the phrase unity, diversity, that we have a lot of differences among ourselves, but we are also at the same time united. But this unity did not come about automatically. At that time, the diversity, it created a lot of problems in unifying the people, because Indians were not just one set of people. So the majority were the Hindus, and the other religions found themselves being sidelined, thought that they were being sidelined. So we will just have a quick recap.
Yes, sir.
Anti-colonialism and nationalism went hand in hand. That means people resented the British rule, and that brought them together in a fight of struggle against the Britishers. And the person who led the movement was Mahatma Gandhi. He had done a sort of background work in South Africa, where he had led the movement against racial discrimination purely on the basis of non-violent means. So his basic thing was non-violence. Satyagraha meant non-violence. So you see that wherever there was any violence by the Indian people, he would call off the movement. So in 1919, it happened against the Rowlatt Act, and this Jallianwala Bagh massacre took place. So in retaliation to the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, some people got violent. So Gandhiji had the thought that people were not, in the initial phases, the people were not yet ready for a non-violent movement. They needed to learn it thoroughly. Then, what are the non-violent ways of a movement? Basically, you boycott anything that is British. So you will start a non-cooperation movement. It was our cooperation which enabled the British to get a stronghold in India. So do the opposite of that. Start a non-violent, non-cooperation movement. So you boycott British goods. You picket liquor shop. Picket means to block the entrance. So liquor is very bad for the mental and physical health of anybody. So boycott liquor shops, and then boycott British clothes, use khadi, and then boycott schools and universities. But then an alternative system was not set up. So people returned back to their normal works as lawyers, as professors, as teachers, and that movement petered off. And then the Chauri Chaura incident took place in 1922, in which around 22 or 23 English police officers were killed. So Gandhiji called a halt to the non-cooperation movement. And Simon Commission came, and it was greeted with the slogans of Simon, go back. Why? You are thinking about how to govern India. That was what Simon Commission said, but it did not have even one Indian representative. So that is basically nonsense. The British were just imposing themselves on the Indian Indian population. Then Gandhiji unified the movement against salt movement. So he said, do not impose tax on salt and do not have a monopoly on salt manufacture. So even marched from Sabarmati till Dandi, 40 miles, and he symbolically boiled water, which is a way of manufacturing salt, and he broke the salt law. So now we have non-cooperation plus civil disobedience going hand in hand. Civil disobedience. Civil means among the common people. Disobedience is not to obey. So basically, do not obey any rule of the government which you think is unjust. And most of the rules of the government was unjust. Basically, it was defying the government. And the government didn't take it easily. It imposed harsh measures. So Congress leaders were arrested. About 1 lakh people were imprisoned. Women and children were beaten up. Even they were not spared. So people would get violent in return, and the Gandhiji would call off any movement if people got violent. Okay. We take a short break now, and we will join at 6 o'clock for our English session.
Okay, sir.
Okay, sir.
Okay, students, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So we will start. Today we'll cover two short poems by Robert Frost. One is Dust of
Sir,
Snow.
I think this has been covered.
Yeah, but for new students. Yeah.
Okay, sir.
Ah. So some students have joined and they have not yet. And
Yes, sir,
it
no
will be a
problem.
revision for you. Okay. Now I will first recite the poem. I will explain the poem and we'll do a few question answers. The way a dust of snow. The poem is the way a crow shook down on me, the dust of snow from a hemlock tree. Now, very simply put, some snow has hit the poet and a crow has is the person who has thrown the snow on the poet. So what is the result of that? Because the crow shakes the tree, the snow falls on the poet. Because of that, the second stanza has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I had viewed. Now, basically, this poem does not explain a lot of things, but it is easy to understand. Why just a little bit of snow falling on somebody can change his or her mood for better. That is not explained, but it changes the mood for sure. So what the poet is trying to say is that in our life, small things can also affect us in a very positive manner. That's all. That is the basic meaning of the poem. And then we go to the implications of the poem. It means we must always have hope and patience in our heart. We must persist through the hard times so that something good will eventually occur in some time. And the agent of change may not be something very big, may not be something revolutionary. It may be a small thing, as simple as that. Did you get it, students? Yes? Okay. Now, let's analyze the poem. The way a crow shook down on me. A very simple and greatly significant act. Now, how do we know that the poet is depressed? By the last three lines, has given last second stanza has given my heart a change of mood. We assume that the mood change of mood is from bad to good. How? the next two lines and saved some part of a day I had rued. R-U-E-D. Rue means to regret something. So basically something was happening which the poet did not like. It had made him gloomy, hopeless, sad, depressed, everything on the low side of emotions. But suddenly that fell on him and he got hope. We do not know why or how, but it did. So small things of nature can affect us with a lot of positivity. They can take away our gloom and depression and make us feel cheerful. So that is the poem. It says the rest of the day. Rest of the day would not be spent in as much depression as he had spent the earlier part of the day. Now, to know, we go to certain technicalities. It is the rhyme scheme of the poem. The way a crow, the sound O, make it B, shook down on me, the sound of E, make it B. The way a crow make it A, O, sound of crow ending, make it A. Me, make it B. The dust of snow, again the sound of O, that is A, from a hemlock tree, E, the ending in E, so B. So this is the rhyming scheme, which also is in the second stanza. I has given my heart a change of mood. Heart, arc sound, wood sound, then again arc sound, and saved some part of a day I had viewed. Id sound, mood and rude are rhyming. So this is the rhyme scheme of the poem AB, AB. Then we have certain symbolism here, which is the hemlock tree and the crow. Now, basically, in traditional means of expression, the hemlock tree and crow are considered to be signs of ill omen. Ill omen means something that stands for sorrow. This hemlock is a tree which is a poisonous tree, and crow in literature does not have a good perception that crow and hemlock tree stands for something ill omen means harbingers means something bad is going to happen. But in this will lead to something good. So we have the symbolism in hemlock tree and crow. Okay. Then we have irony in this. What is the irony here? What is said and what is meant? What appears to be true and the real truth. Now, the poisonous hemlock tree and the RUE means to regret. It also means a medicinal plant. So, bit of irony here that the poet refers to the poisonous hemlock tree and the medicinal RUE. So, now certain questions are: what is the dust of snow? What does the poet say has changed his mood? How has the poet's mood changed? The dust of snow means the fine particles of snow out here. And the sudden shower, there's a sudden shower in the form of dust of snow has changed the poet's mood. The poet's mood changed from that of sadness to one of happiness. He felt refreshed and wanted to enjoy and make good use of the rest of the day. So basically, nature is represented as something which has a powerful effect on human beings. So main theme of the poem is that small things in nature can make a great and profound change in our hearts and minds. So we must persist in the hard times, and then we will eventually get some encouragement from nature. That in a nutshell is what this poem is all about. Okay. Then we have one more poem by the same poet, Fire and Ice. Now, the earlier poem was one of hope, and the mood of the poem changed from that of gloom and doom to one of happiness. Now, the theme of Dust of Snow was hope. Then, the theme of the poem Fire and Ice. Now, here, fire stands for passionate. See, imagine fire. So, fire burns. Fire that got a lot of energy inside it. So, that is the energy of desire, of lust, of avarice, wanting and wanting more. So, imagine a lot of emotional upheaval taking place in your life, for positive or for negative. Here, the poet is talking in the negative sense. So that is the implication of the word fire. And in opposition to fire, see, I will represent you in, I will explain it to you, which will make it very clear. So somebody, without any provocation, gives you a tight slap on the face. That is a fire. What is ice? Suppose you are walking, somebody is walking down the street and the old lady falls on the ground by slipping on a banana skin. And the other person simply shrugs off. Means he does not even have a spontaneous response of going and asking the lady, "Oh, how are you? Are you hurt? Can I help you?" He does not even do that. So when we have cold indifference, so that is represented by ice. So here we have fire for passion and ice means cold indifference. Now, what is the poem? Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I have tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. So in the first stanza of the poem, the poet is saying that some people think that because of the burning passion of people, because of desire of people, here desire is not in the good, healthy, and happy sense of the word. It means avarice. It means to possess something. It means to dominate something. It means to impose oneself on something. It is not in a positive sense. So, fire, some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. So, he's giving the opinion of people. Some people say that because of passion, the world will end, and some people say because of the cold indifference and cruelty of people, the world will come to an end. तो चली गया स्क्रीन नहीं है वो तो सॉल्व स्क्वायर ये हो गया इधर x क्यूब है ना तो इसको उल्टा लिखेंगे तो माइनस आ जाएगा ना ऊपर समझा समझा क्या हाँ तो ये -7 ये पूरा ये ठीक है समझा ये बात फिर कीजिए अभी जैसा फिर इंडिविजुअली किया था हम लोग वैसा करेंगे You can hear me now, students? Yes?
Yes, sir.
So, from what I have tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. So, he has seen the blind ambition of people. See, basically, he is imagining conquests of people, people who want to raid other people's empires and lands. So, that is the desire which he is talking of. So, grab somebody of others and destroy somebody others in the process. So that is the meaning of fire here. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I have tasted of desire, what he has seen, tasted of means experienced in life. I hold with those who favor fire. So, hold means to take the side or favor of somebody. Hold favor, inclined towards people who say that the world will end in fire. Okay. Now, then we come to the second stanza. But if it had to perish twice, now He's just giving an imaginary situation. A world has ended. Suppose there are two endings to a world. That is what it means by if it had to perish twice. Because if the destruction by fire fails for some reason, I think I know enough of it to say that for destruction, ice is also great
Sir,
and
can you
would
explain
suffice.
that line again? That perish twice.
Just be a little louder.
Sir, can you explain the first line of the second stanza again?
But if it had to perish twice, perish means to be destroyed. So if the world were to be destroyed twice, got it? But the first line, I will explain.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
If the world had to be destroyed twice, I think I know enough of hate. Ice stands for cold, indifference, hatred, cruelty, all that sort of things. To say that for destruction, ice is also great. What the poet is saying that for the destruction of the world, it is not only that uh, fire is required, ice will also do the work, and would suffice. Would suffice means would be sufficient enough to destroy the world. So, hate can linger in people's minds and hearts for years, sometimes even lifetimes. It can lead to the destruction of the world if it lasts. So, what the poem is, what the poet indirectly says is that love and sympathy will save the world. That is the basic gist of the poem, but it is not to be seen. So we need to get some more love and sympathy in the world. Now we have the technicality of the rhyme sequence. See how the lines ending. Fire, A. Ice, ice does not rhyme with fire, so we write B over here. Desire rhymes with fire, so we write A here. I hold with those who favor fire, again A. Basically, what you do is that you look at the sound of the words and then give them alphabets. So fire, ire, the sound ire is there. Give it alphabet A. Some say in ice, so give this alphabet D. From what I have tasted of desire, again ire, A. I hold with those who favor fire, ire, again A. But if I had to spell this twice rhymes with ice. So B thing comes again. I think I know enough of hate. Hate is neither the sound of ire nor ice. So give it C. Ice, B. Great, hate. For 8, we have the letter C and would suffice. Suffice rhymes with ice. So you get the alphabet D. So this is the rhyme sequence. And poetic devices, figures of speech
Repetition.
used in the poem, alliteration, repetition of the initial consonant sounds in the same line. Some say. So that is repeated. So that is alliteration. And then we have paradox. If it had to perish twice, can anybody die 2 times? So that is the paradox. If somebody is finished, that means he is finished for good. So if somebody were to perish twice in poetry, you can take a lot of liberty with logic. So that is called as poetic license. You can move about grammar here and there a bit for the sake of rhyming, and you can also mean things which do not exist in reality. Then we have symbolism. Fire is a symbol of desire, and ice is a symbol for hate. So this is the gist of the poem. Now, fire, you will be asked to, you may be asked, one of the question may be, what do fire and ice stand for? And they will give you some option. So fire stands for greed. You want more of something. Avarice.
Desire.
Avarice is something which you want a lot of something. That is an avarice. When you want something a lot, that is called as avarice. Avarice is different from ambition in the sense that ambition is healthy and normal, whereas avarice, when ambition exceeds all degrees of reasonableness, then it becomes avarice. When it becomes a sort of madness, then it becomes avarice. Lust, lust is having a passionate feeling for owning something. Conflict, conflict is when you have a fight. Fury, again, angry, when you are aggressive. So when the word fire with regards to this poem occurs, just remember of everything that is passionate, something emotions are in an upheaval. So that will be fire. Then imagine for cold, for ice. Ice stands for cruelty, for indifference, when you just do not care for anybody. So then just not caring for somebody or something, that is also a form of cruelty. Rigidity, when you're very firm in your opinion. Insensitivity, coldness, indifference, and hatred. Insensitivity means if something happens, something bad happens and to somebody else, and you're not affected by it at all, that is insensitivity. Insensitivity also means to say or do something which a gentleman in normal situation will not do. Coldness is like the example that I gave, that if an old lady falls on a banana skin and you just do not react, that is also a form of reaction. That is called as coldness. When you act as if you are a machine and you're not a human being. Whenever there is somebody facing some problem, the spontaneous human impulse is to react with sympathy. If you do not have that, then you are abnormal. And that abnormality is coldness. Indifference. Indifference, almost the same as coldness, the meaning. Hatred. Ice stands for a form of hatred also. Why you didn't help that person? Because in your heart and mind, in general, you have hatred towards people other than yourself. Okay. Then, what do fire and ice stand for? That could be a question. So fire stands for desire. It indicates all types of greed and lust. In today's world, mankind greed is endangering the very existence of planet Earth. People's greed. The word ice in the poem indicates hatred and indifference, which is as cold as ice. So there is no warmth. Fire word is different and warmth word is different. Warmth is a sort of warm-heartedness, a generosity of spirit. That is warmth. And cold indifference and hate can be as destructive as fire. Ice indicates hatred and indifference. So now, right, what are the different views about the end of the world? That is one question. There's a debate that is going on about the end of the world. People say that the world will end in fire or in ice. The world is transitory. Transitory means ever moving, ever shifting, ever changing. Nothing is permanent in this universe. So there are two ways the universe will end. One is by fire, that is through hatred, to desire and passion, and one is through ice, which is through hatred and cold indifference. Now, how does
Sir, your voice is not coming.
now man is selfish, avaricious, that is greedy, lustful, indifferent, and hateful. So, in general, these are the bad qualities of human beings. Robert Frost cautions the common man and says that we should not forget the bitter reality that everything in the world is transitory and that is inevitable. And that if you do not have love and sympathy for each other, you cannot save the world. Now, Why does the poet hold with those who favor fire? So, this is the question is, from what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. Why does the poet think so? The poet takes side of those who believe that the world will be destroyed by fire because Robert Frost, the poet, connects fire with desire. Desire is powerful and it can bring about a quick end to the world.
Sir,
Yes, tell me.
so the desire also means fire only, na?
Yes, desire is fire. Desire stands for fire. And here the desire is not of the healthy and happy desire. It is desire for something which you have to acquire through destructive measures.
Evil.
Exactly. You said the perfect word, evil. Through evil means. Now see, this poem is in a very depressive mode. The poet is talking about the end of the world. It can't get any worse than this. And it's a bitter reflection of the poem's experiences that some people are consumed by desire to own something that is not theirs. And some people are very indifferent, hateful, and cold towards their fellow human beings. So you cannot survive without helping and cooperating with each other. That is the main theme of this poem. Then, what is the sum and substance? What is the basics? What is the fundamental of the poem Fire and Ice? There's nothing in this world is eternal. So, first the poet says that the world will end in fire because of his certain personal experiences with desire. He must have seen people fight with each other, try to destroy each other, if not physically, mentally, with their passion. And at the other part, at the other end of the spectrum, you have indifference and hatred, which is represented by ice. So even indifference and hatred can destroy the world. So that is, you connect desire with fire and hatred with ice. That is the gist of the poem. Now, there is one difference, slight difference between fire and ice. So what is that? Desire consumes something very quickly. Hate can stay and linger in people's mind for years and years, and sometimes even for lifetimes. Hate consumes the hater even more than the person or group hated. And it can see the very fact that you hate somebody, that can totally consume you. It can be more destructive to you than even the person that you are hating. So, this hatred could end the world one day. So, the theme of the poem is the powerful negative emotions of people which can lead in the destruction of the world. So if you have a lot of jealousy and desire, you do not, you want to own somebody, own something or somebody to conflict, that is also not good. And the other thing is that when you have indifference, hatred, and coldness is lack of empathy, 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 sympathy. Empathy means you put yourself in the other person's shoes. Sympathy is you go one step further and you try to feel what the other person is feeling. So basically, mankind runs on good feelings. And if these good feelings are substituted by bad feelings or destructive feelings, then that is as good as the end of the world. Basically, a lot of symbolism is used here. There is no direct thing like fire or ice destroying the world, but they fire and ice stand for bad, negative emotions. Okay? Now, students, do you have any doubt, any clarification on these two poems?
No, sir,
Anything
no
which
queries.
needs to be explain further or any point of view of your own? Yes?
No, sir, no query.
Yes, even if you do not have it now, and while you are going through this poem, and if certain doubts or questions arise your mind, you can jot it down, and in the next class you can put it forward, and I will resolve it. Okay? So we end today's class now. Thank you, students.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Welcome.
sir.
Welcome.